The Gambler's Journey, Balancing Entertainment and Addiction.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a very interesting and maybe touchy subject to discuss today. And with me, I have Kyle Scerri, Manager Gaming and Fintech for CSB Group, and Miruna Pandere, who is an affiliate manager at Trust Dice and also a PhD student in addiction studies, right? So we have some very interesting debate here that we can go on, from an academic point of view, from a practical point of view, and from a legal point of view. So let's start from the basics. We know that addiction is an issue in our industry. From a general perspective, do we have enough tools to prevent it, or are we essentially just firefighting? I'll start with you, Kyle. Go for it.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. From a tool perspective, I think, generally speaking, when you look at regulatory landscapes, laws, how gambling is regulated, not regulated in other ways, generally speaking, the tools are there. That's my personal opinion. The tools are generally there. What I think we lack is a proper understanding of why operators set up their business, why players really play, and trying to reach a compromise there, a midway as to why the two are interacting with one another. So from a tool perspective, it's there. It's how you apply those tools to that relationship and making sure that they are being applied well. I think that's where we need to improve. Speaking generally, of course, because we can't get into every jurisdiction granularly. But conceptually, I think that's where we lack a bit of understanding, and that is a very key tool to maybe have going forward.
When we speak about tools, do you believe that there are preventive tools, or are there tools to control it, like, after the fact, or catching it when it happens and then?
Theoretically, I think we have quite a good, I would say, toolkit of preventive tools, right? That's in theory, at least. But the truth is that from experience of viewing operators and different market players, we end up firefighting most of the time, okay? And advising on what you should do because this went wrong, okay? So the tools are there to prevent 100%, but if you don't apply them or you don't enforce them well enough, you end up firefighting.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe from an academic and also from an operator's perspective, do you feel the same, or do you disagree at a certain degree? Let's put it this way.
Of course. So I think the two sides are really different. If we're coming from an operator perspective, at this point, I would say that we are actively firefighting because there's no clear definition of what addiction is and how we can differentiate between a normal player or a professional player and an addictive player. So regulations are really different when talking about that, and as an operator, it makes us hard for us to identify it and to fight it. We have processes put in place, like self-exclusion, for example, that can work to mitigate addiction, but at the end of the day, it's a very subjective matter, how you can identify it and how you can fight against it. From an academic perspective, in my PhD, I'm trying to prove that addiction and addiction of all kinds, not necessarily only gambling, is an illness, is a mental illness, and we feel like the only effective way to prevent it would be to ensure that a potential future addict has access to medical and psychological help, I think.
Okay, so it in a sense, to destigmatize it, no?
Of course.
To make it like something, in a sense, I guess if we look, 40, 50 years back, it was kind of shameful for someone to be seen as going to a therapist or a psychologist or a, psychiatrist and so on. And over the years, maybe this has destigmatized kind of, and now people openly speak about, I'm in therapy, I go to therapy, and so on, and there's not the shame, that used to come sort of, from society. So it's maybe also something from a societal perspective to sort of see it as, something that people don't have to hide, and that
Of
maybe
course.
will then allow people to more easily seek help, no?
Of course. And sociologically speaking, hiding and the stigma that you mentioned that is associated with addiction only encourages the addict to hide his behavior, not seek help. And not seeking help creates a vicious circle of addiction that is not, at the end of the day, is not mutually beneficial for anyone, not for the operator, not for the player, for any party involved is harmed in this way, because a general idea would be that operators would like to have addicted players. They would encourage like high rollers and stuff like that, but that's not true at all. They bring a lot of problems for operators as well, and it's also very bad to see that people are struggling with this illness. So we would very much prefer to have like only responsible gamblers.
Okay, that is a very interesting point, because I think that we kind of see two sides of this. I think that even from your experience, you deal with certain operators that as you said earlier to me, go about it more as a box ticking exercise, rather than something that can really affect them, and can really even improve their business, basically. And is this an educational thing, or how do you go about it?
I think operators do sometimes end up viewing it as a box ticking exercise. I mean, ultimately, it's a compliance obligation. You tick the box and you're good to go, and you're in the safe zone when it comes to the law, not breaching the law, etc., etc. But if we look a little bit short to medium term and even more long term, does it make more sense that ultimately we have an education platform and we actively try to educate members of staff within an operator's infrastructure, we try to educate society in a wider sense, that in order to sustain this business, because ultimately promoters of a gambling business set up shop for them to make money, that is the truth.
Yeah.
We need to have a sustainable model. So the problem gambler needs to be, so to speak, not cut off, but rather controlled.
Controlled, yes, exactly.
How do you control the problem gambler is obviously part of a bigger discussion, I think. But I think that is the way we should view it moving forward, right? We need to create a situation whereby we have, I would say, an acknowledgement that this is a business. They're there to make money. The gambler is there to have fun and entertain himself or herself. And we need to control that environment and not suppress it.
Okay. So in the meantime, we welcome Mario Ovcharov, CEO of UltraPlay. I'll drag you right into the conversation. Sort of from an operator's perspective, how have you seen how do you deal with this to try and mitigate, and how, as Kyle was saying, I mean, how do you feel that it affects your business from a medium to long term perspective, creating more stability and so on, versus maybe the immediate returns that you might get from people who might sort of not be gambling responsibly?
Yeah, thanks. Basically, first of all, very much depends on the jurisdiction and how the certain jurisdiction address that, and you need to comply with, whatever they say. So some do that better, some not. If we're talking about a more, a gray operation and working worldwide, or the .com situation, it's a little bit different. But let's look at the aspect of where gambling responsibly, which also means for the user to be responsible where he gambles, the websites he picks.
Yeah, of course.
It's a huge role, because sometimes if you're in a safe environment and the compliance has been done better, it would be much harder for him to go in that direction. Many jurisdictions have limitations on the time they can spend on the site, on the money they can spend across all websites in the jurisdiction. There's a central register that checks for each login if they're have been excluded from another website or if they have spent their monthly allowance already. So in that situation, it's much harder to go,
Yeah.
addicted. But then once you're excluded yourself and you still want to play and go and find websites that you can do it.
Exactly. So it can be a double-edged sword, no? And I think that sort of we can now talk a little bit about regulators because love them or hate them, they're there. And I think everyone has an opinion as to how much regulators are effective, how much regulators should be involved, how much they should control things. I think I can start with Kyle because you work a lot with regulation and regulators and so on. Sort of, are they what is the role of the regulator in your view? Let's put it this way. Sort of, are regulators really able to achieve this player protection that they so much publicize in their mandate? Because every regulator that you see, sort of one, the main part of what they say sort of is the reason for regulation is like sort of we want to protect the players. I mean, are they successful in this, or maybe are they actually doing a little more harm than good sometimes? Because if you are too restrictive and you have a problem players, they end up going to places where they are less protected and play anyway. Sort of is locking them out the right way to approach this.
I think a regulator's role in all of this is to create, I would say, the pathway towards having a conclusion where you can realize you have a gambling problem, right? So, and to realize you have a gambling problem, that is on the operator to help you realize you have a gambling problem, to prevent you from falling into, so to speak, a deeper hole. Okay, now, if we're going to consider a regulator as having to solve your problem, that's not going to happen. The regulator will not be able to legislate in a way or regulate in a way to solve your problem, I would say. So the more we try to suppress there in order to solve the problem or to somehow, I would say, abolish problem gambling altogether, the more the industry potentially will go underground, right? They will find a way. A problem gambler will find a way to gamble. So
yes, and that is one of the major issues now, because there's always a workaround. I mean,
There's
I always
always
say
a
this:
workaround.
there's always a workaround.
Always.
Whenever you put in a restriction, it's always a workaround. So there is something that's going too far now.
There's always a workaround, and ultimately, if you're going to force me into the workaround as an operator, there's a high chance I'll consider it. I'm not saying that operators will go down that road. I think it's not responsible to go down that road. But we time and time see, once again, that they're there to make money, and ultimately, if I can make money going down this road in a perfectly legal way, right? Because there's a workaround. I'm not saying a breach, but a workaround. And I'm going to go down that road, and that's most of the time detrimental to the player.
Yeah. So let's take the operator's point of view on this. So pretty much the same question. I mean, your experience with regulators and sort of do they maybe go too far in terms of sort of is the this approach of trying to close all the avenues for someone where in reality you're not really doing that because they will find another way, sort of how does it affect you as an operator? I mean, how do you view it? What's your view? What's your experience with regulators on this?
Sure. So as far as regulations go, we don't really see that much success as we would like to when tackling this issue. And also, regulations can also backfire because there's no clear definition all over the plate of what the procedures should be in order to deal with these issues and what the definition is for an addicted player. So we think where regulations could improve would be to try and divide the issue and regulate both the operator and the addicted player, and provide for us an easier way to deal. Maybe a procedure that could be standardized and clearly understood. Because at this point, there's very much an ambiguous definition. People don't really understand how to deal with this. So going on it both sides would really be easier, because as far as addiction goes, when we view it from an academic perspective, an addict will always find a way to fuel his addiction, no matter how much you regulate him, no matter how what methods you impose. There are ways that he can bypass all that. So you might regulate casinos, for example, but he will go on the dark web, or he will find other ways to fuel his addiction. So going on both sides could really help mitigate this issue. And from an operator side, I think that this would be better for everybody in the game. Yeah.
Cool. Mario, what's your view? From your experience on this.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's no perfect combination where just one regulation can solve all problems. As you just said, players are not the same. Someone might be, spending more but is not addicted, than other that spends all his money and they're not such a significant amount, can be considered addicted. That's why as you said, it needs to be looked at a more granular level, and operators should have more freedom to work like that, because otherwise, we're saying there are no more VIP players like that. If you're restricted to lose €1,000 a month,
yes.
There are no more VIP departments. There are no more,
Absolutely.
loyalty programs. That should all be stopped. Then.
No. I mean, obviously, there's a very big difference, between a VIP and a problem gambler. I mean, a problem gambler could be losing €10 a month and still be a problem gambler.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I think an important side would be to try and analyze player behavior and try to identify a pattern rather than just analyzing the amount of money that he gambles. I don't think an addiction definition should have to do that much with the amount of money a player gambles, but with the player behavior. And I think we could really focus on that and identifying psychological traits of an addicted gambler.
And do you feel that there are tools for this, or
at the moment I don't think so, but it's an interesting point that regulators could look into now with the development of AI as well.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, with the development of AI, I am pretty optimistic that in the future there will be ways to easily identify and prevent such behavior.
And one thing
catching it early really helps also.
One thing that I was thinking is kind of right now our approach to problem gambling is cold turkey. Which for most addictions is in a sense proven as not necessarily the right way to do it. I'll ask you even from a regulator's perspective and from a legal perspective, but sort of are there ways, or maybe even through your studies and so on, in which something like this can be implemented, where sort of instead of cutting you off, and then you're going scrambling, somewhere else, to start reducing limits, for example, over time and so on. Do you think that would be something that might be helpful to the problem gamblers, where there's a controlled decrease, kind of, instead of okay, you're cut off, you can't play anywhere.
So at the moment, as you mentioned, yes, we do self-exclusion for those players. So we offer that option. We have 2 avenues that we take when dealing with problem gamblers. First one would be the issue of a refund, but that's also problematic. So we do issue refunds in the situation, but we see that only fuels and incentivizes the addiction. And the other one we do is self-exclusion. So what we do is that, like, every time a player comes to us and signals that, okay, I have a problem, I'm an addict, we offer the possibility of self-exclusion, or we even do it ourselves. But we've had issues where we did it ourselves for players, and then players were upset that we excluded them without their mentioned permission.
I mean, what about sort of, instead of self-excluding them or refunding them, allowing to them to continue to play but at lower levels, and then
Adding a cap, adding a cap.
progressively sort of like reducing the limits at which they can play until they are, comfortable again,
Of
because
course.
that would maybe incentivize them not to go out and
Yeah, I think adding a cap is a really interesting idea, and is a concept not only used in gambling addiction, but in other sorts of addiction as well. It could be something worth exploring and something really effective to help them go lower and lower and lower until they are finally rid of the problem. But that should also be complemented by psychological help, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
course.
It's like sort of, okay, we'll let you. We'll let you continue playing as long as you can prove that you're seeking psychological help.
Exactly.
We'll reduce your limits and so on, and then at some point maybe we'll open you back up. I mean, would that be something that could be implemented legally? From a regulatory perspective and so on.
I think it's something which already exists in some jurisdictions. So some
Okay.
operators do have the possibility to allow you to limit your deposits, limit your wages. They allow you to self-exclude in specific ways. Prompts on the website in question come up for you to be aware of what's going on, and for you as a player to maybe acknowledge that you should tone it down a notch. So it is already there conceptually. I just think that we often end up in a situation whereby operators take decisions to limit their legal risk. And that is not necessarily something which will bode well to ensure that the way we approach problem gambling is sustainable in the long term. It's a short-term fix, it's firefighting, I suppress my legal risk, but that does not mean that I solve the problem or I have added some form of value to the player.
Exactly. So, Mario, sort of, if you had to think about what would be the tools that maybe you don't have right now, and sort of that you would wish you had in order to better control problem gambling, in order to create a more stable business and so on. I mean, what would be your sort of dream tools? Let's put it this way.
I cannot say it like that, but she mentioned some more in-depth analyzing tool that you can if you know what patterns could potentially mean that there's an addiction, they should be incorporated and follow for that. Times of play, amounts of deposits, how often, how much times he spent on the site, stuff like that. But as he said, many jurisdictions already have many
Yes.
things done in that direction, but again, not perfect. And this could be to be incorporated on a global level will be very hard. And I cannot say like that. What's the ideal
No.
tool?
It's fine. I mean, I don't know, Maruna, do you have any view on that? Like sort of magic wand kind of.
When speaking about tools that we would like to have, I think AI comes back into the conversation again. I think it's really promising to look at that in the future, to add that to the conversation when talking about mitigating addiction and helping addicted players. So it would be, I think that would be the most useful tool to have in the future.
Do you have any, any ideas of sort of what how maybe regulators even can improve their their tools if they had like sort of this unlimited resources, technology, and so on?
I think I would create a situation, an environment whereby the regulator responsible for promoting a jurisdiction's gaming business, essentially sector, is completely segregated from the same regulator which is concerned with player protection. Because I think ultimately
Okay, that's a
we
very
end up
interesting point.
in a situation whereby we push economic growth, we push the industry forward from a monetary perspective, and we tend to put the other issue.
Yes, because sort of they're kind of competing with themselves now, and yes. Okay. That's a very valid point. We're out of time. I don't know if we have time for some questions. Maybe, yeah. Any questions?
Hello, thank you for the useful discussion. My question is about responsible gambling. Eventually, for us to understand if the player is addicted, we need to understand what proportion of his or her income is he consuming on the gaming, right? Many of the regulators already ask us to check their source of funds, wealth, to understand this question. However, not many players are keen to provide their financial information to operators, while it's very easy to create new profile in a competing website. So eventually we are losing customers because of this inconvenience. And also we are losing ability to track how much actually they are consuming in the casino because they play in elsewhere. So what do you see as a solution to make this effort really work for us to retain customers and for customers to make it convenient to continue playing on the operator's website?
Maybe Kyle, you can talk about this, because I think it's also about sort of this balance now between invasiveness and sort of protection in a sense.
I think the fact that a player doesn't want to disclose their financial standing or their position is a red flag in itself, right? So really and truly, it is trying to help the player understand at that point why you're asking the information. We often talk about source of funds, source of wealth, which is a very relevant discussion, but ultimately it's also about affordability. Yeah, so the player needs to understand why you're asking these questions, not necessarily because you think that that player may have a tie to some illicit income, because that often ends up being the highlight issue, but also trying to explain to the player that this is also an affordability discussion. This is also a discussion regarding their mental health. And I think if we prompt that from before, the player may potentially understand and realize that all of this is actually beneficial to me, rather than somehow suppressing my want to be entertained, because it's all about that ultimately.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys want to add anything to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think from an operator side, we really have to look at how the players are acting. And I know that there's always a threat that they will go to competition if you kick them out. But we also have to take responsibility, because addiction is an illness and it has to be treated. And we have our part of the responsibility to take. So as a fellow operator, I would say that.